Hello, everybody. This is Dan. I know it's pretty late, even for a Saturday night, but I wanted to do a live stream and basically catch up with people. There's been a few things on my mind, too, obviously, that I wanted to talk about. But yeah, it's kind of late to do this. But then again, it depends on where you're at. So I also know that there are probably some people over in Europe or wherever else, even on the west coast of the United States, that may listen. So I wanted to cover a variety of topics, assuming that no one wants to talk about anything in particular in the chat. Kind of reflect on what we've been seeing as a whole with a variety of different sort of current events. In my opinion, the situation in terms of politics and culture and society as a whole continues to pretty much deteriorate. I don't want to be overly negative about it, but there are things that are continuing to go on that don't really bode well, and that's really a vague way of putting it, so I want to get into the specific points that I want to make. The first thing that I've noticed, and this builds on things that I've already said in the past, is I think we're at a point now where we're basically on the verge where people are going to have to make a choice, right? People are going to have to make a major choice between trusting what the media is telling people on an everyday basis, just in a general sense, not in the sense of always agreeing with everything that you hear, because the stakes, I think, have gone beyond that now. In order to be a normie, you pretty much have to believe in something that's not true. You have to believe that the media is interested in giving people information that's accurate. You have to believe that what you can generally trust what they're saying. And I'm not talking about things like, trivial things like the weather or sports scores and stuff like that. I'm talking about, the overall depiction of where things are in society, where things are in our culture, with politics, with ideology, all that bad stuff, good stuff, bad stuff, however you want to describe it. People are going to have to realize that there's very little middle ground anymore. I think people are going to have to realize either, the choice is either you stay a normie and you become a Marxist, because you're ultimately going to adopt Marxist views. Like, it's going to be increasingly difficult, to the point of being nearly impossible, to listen to what mainstream media outlets tell you and still not get caught up into the whole victim ideology that we see in a variety of ways today. The whole, diversity is always good in and of itself. This one group of people are victims because, women are victims, for example, because men are bad, and white people and these white cops are bad, and, black people are all victims of this, what we have going on in our society as a whole, and there's all this systemic racism everywhere. And you just need to wear a mask because that keeps you safe from all of it, evidently. I'm being a smart ass saying that. I realize that the media is not associating all of those issues together, but we're at a point now where so much of it that you hear is about control rather than about actually giving you information. That it's about trying to say you have to think this way on this issue or you're bad. That the normies that continue to believe that, and I think we all know what normies or people that aren't normies are, but just for this context, when I say normie, I mean someone that wants to fit in with the message. They want to fit in with what they see as greater society, right? Those people, if they continue to try to value that, if they continue to, like I say, generally believe what they're taught, and they try to stay in what we would call the Overton window, and I don't want to throw out a bunch of random terms here. That's not what I'm trying to do. But the Overton window is basically the sort of scope or spectrum of political ideas that you're allowed to have in that society without being an outcast, basically. So in other words, the Overton window, even though it's typically depicted as, center left to center right, because of what the media is doing and because of the government and things shifting to a point where the left has so much control over the narrative, through the education system and everything else, the Overton window is basically just an Overton bubble at this point. It's like if you're not a leftist, you don't fit into that. I haven't seen very many people talk about that, but in that context, that seems to me to be what's going on. Unless you live in a rural, sort of traditional, and conservative environment, right? And there are subcultures like that still for sure. If you're not a leftist, you don't fit in to society anymore. If you don't parrot leftist ideas, so I think we're really at a point now, especially now that Trump is mostly out of the picture himself, right? Trump is no longer able to rally people to resist anything. And I'm not saying Trump was a good answer to that, or someone that people really should have tried to rally behind anyway. But the fact remains, in my view at least, my opinion remains that there is really very little middle ground left other than thinking for yourself. People are going to be forced to choose. Either you think for yourself or you're going to be a normie and you're going to become a Marxist. I mean, it's just, if you believe in general, even 2/3 of what the media tells you, or half of what the media tells you from a political standpoint, you're going to have Marxist views. Because, the only middle ground that's left, the only way you could do that and not think for yourself at this point, especially, like I say, since you can't use Trump to sort of concentrate your ideas on, the only other option is to try to watch like Fox News or Breitbart, your sort of quasi sort of mainstream, but they're not accepted as good news outlets by most of your leftists and most of your normies. You can try to like sort of get your news from those places, but they're going to increasingly, and we've seen this with Fox News throughout the last election, they're going to increasingly parrot the same information, because really they're just, as others have pointed out, and it took me a while to get to a point where I agreed with this, but I really do. I've seen what goes on, and I've developed, or I've decided that I agree with this idea. It's just controlled opposition, right? It's just, we just want Fox News to like say that liberals are bad so that conservatives are semi-placated so that they don't go out and actually advocate for anything. That's pretty much what the leftist media is, and that, not the leftist media, but the so-called conservative media outlets. That's really a lot of what they do. And I'm not talking about, guys on the radio that actually speak their mind, but organizations like Fox News, mainly. They're just controlled opposition. All the people on there, they know they can't say anything out of line. They just have to kind of straddle the center right as best they can and not piss off the left too much, but, at the same time, just continue to give people an excuse for not just saying, what, the mass media, the major media outlets, they're all full of crap, and I'm going to actually have to think for myself now. Right? And of course, you could just look at the smaller news media outlets as well, but then you still really have to be able to sort of determine who's telling you the truth and who's not if you're doing that. You can't just sit around and watch TV, or you can't just look at the same news media every day without looking at what's going on around you. You ultimately have to start thinking for yourself, or you can just believe what the mainstream media tells you and basically become a Marxist normie. Like, the sort of division between being a normie but not having Marxist ideas is becoming almost impossible to maintain as the media becomes so full of crap that there is no middle ground like that anymore. There is no way to really make that work, right? And like I say, I think a lot of conservatives and people on the right, they were using Trump and just trying to kind of rely on him to tell, you know, the people how to basically resist what the left was doing. But now that he has been mostly silenced and he no longer has any power, and you could argue about how much power he really had to begin with, even as president, what are conservatives, what are people on the right going to do? They're going to actually have to think for themselves and just say, you know what, everything we're being taught is bullshit, right? This whole, whether it's the racial stuff, the gender-based stuff, the coronavirus stuff, we're being lied to. All of it is propaganda. And we're at a point where we actually have to think for ourselves now. And that's really what we should have been doing to begin with. Or a lot of these people are just going to look at it and say, you know, I'm just going to watch Fox News and believe whatever they tell me instead. And as organizations like that continue to shift to the left, if they do, it's going to be very similar to what the leftist normies end up being. Or, like I say, they could end up just taking that short route and just believing what the media tells them and saying, yeah, you know, Trump was bad, I shouldn't have supported him anyway. You see a lot of former Trump supporters I've seen. People that voted for Trump are like, well, you know, they saw all the stuff in the mainstream media about how bad Trump was after the election results were received, and they've turned against him. And that was their whole goal with a lot of that. So let me catch up on some of the comments. Pedrito Navaja says, when it comes to my family members, this is exactly the issue, Dan. The left has control over the culture, the media, and the education system, all of it. Yep. And, you know, what I'm basically asking here is, what are the people that haven't gone along with that, but they sort of gravitated toward Trump's message? What are they going to do at this point? Because a lot of them are recognizing that we're being scammed, but a lot of them aren't. And they want to kind of, there's, I think, this desire to still fit in, but you can't do that as a Trump supporter anymore. I mean, it depends on your region. Like in Ohio has vastly larger numbers of Trump supporters compared to Biden supporters in most of the state. But that being said, more and more people are being, you know, given this propaganda on a daily basis. And where are these Trump supporters going to go now? Are they going to just give up on the system and recognize that they're being lied to constantly? Because I really don't see them doing that. I don't see enough people waking up. You know, I see that with the coronavirus stuff, where it's like, think about this. We've had a mask mandate where you have to, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about the coronavirus. I said that I wasn't going to talk more about this, and yet here I am. But just as an example, people have been wearing masks for 14 months now. It's been over a year. Okay? The numbers, and I found this to be, I mean, it's morbid in a way, but it's sort of funny. They gave this like ratio of comparing where the numbers were in April of last year. It was on a particular day, a few weeks ago, compared to where it was, you know, now. Like April, whatever the date was, the number of new coronavirus cases was this. And April, the same date last year, it was that. And the difference was like, it was like 5% lower. It's like they had a number and it went from like 1,500 and something new cases to like 1,400 and something new cases. And it's like, well, you know, that's not very good. What has this policy given us in that 14 months? What advantage do we have now? And of course, the media, what they'll say is, these people aren't wearing masks. These people are bad, right? And again, I don't want to talk about the mask mandate and all that very much here, but, you know, I've given it, I think, too much attention already probably, but people just don't think for themselves. They just listen to what the media tells them rather than using common sense. Like, common sense has been completely sapped out of the society that I see, you know. over the last several years. It had already been in decline, and people just seem to have no ability to do basic observation anymore. It's like people are getting tased for not wearing masks by the police. This has happened many times over. And yet you want to say that it's not being enforced enough. Oh, it's these 5% of people who aren't wearing a mask. It's their fault that the numbers are still so high. It's not that the policy doesn't work. It's just, all it takes, in my opinion, is just looking at it for what it is and saying, well, if the numbers are only 5% lower, and the other part of this is 2% of the people that get coronavirus die. 30% of people in Ohio have gotten their vaccines, right? Over 30% of people in Ohio have completed their vaccinations. Okay. And it's not like it was just a random 30%. It's like the most vulnerable people, the people that are older and sicker, are the ones that have been given this vaccine predominantly. So if the people that have the risk of dying have pretty much all been given the vaccine, and yeah, there are going to be some exceptions. There are going to be some people who you think wouldn't get sick, but they do. They actually have major symptoms. But by and large, you can almost guarantee that the fatality rate now for the people that haven't been vaccinated, it should be below 0.5%. And yet we're continuing to have these mask mandates that don't work because the virus itself is continuing to be spread at almost the same rate. And the people that are really vulnerable are supposedly protected, right? We hear about how important these vaccines are and how they're helping people. Okay, so let's get rid of the mask mandate. Let's get rid of all the restrictions now, with maybe a few minor exceptions. Why in the world does this make sense to continue with these policies? Again, 2% of people die from the coronavirus. 30% of people are fully vaccinated. Why do we still need to go on with this? Again, people just can't wake up and see this because they are being bombarded by the predominantly leftist news media that wearing a mask saves lives. Even if you go to the Google homepage today, it says, get vaccinated, save lives, and it shows these little images of people wearing masks. It's pathetic. Like, why would anybody that actually thinks for themselves reach these conclusions? And the answer is, these people are normies. These people are on their way to pretty much supporting having all of their rights taken away, right? And I don't want to get on too much more of a rant here. Let me continue to read some comments. Shinobi Wan, Yo-Yo +1 shield. I don't know what that actually indicates, but thank you for the comment nonetheless. Anon Bradley says, even alternative media is corrupt. Many of them run on thin margins, and it forces them to load things to their benefit, not to your benefits. That's right. You have to, like I say, the thing that I'm kind of, I don't want to say disappointed in, but the thing that I don't expect to happen, and this is kind of negative, but I don't think most people can think for themselves at this point in society. And I'm not saying I always have the answers or that I don't have my own biases and, that I'm always 100% objective, but I know how to think about politics. I know I I have some ability to think for myself. And unfortunately, most people they either don't want to do that or they've just been misled by the media for so long that they can't do that. And it's at a point where even your people that aren't SJWs, really, they really don't want radical policies. They are still becoming Marxists because all they have to do is adopt the views that the media tells them to have, and they have Marxist views. Right? All you have to do is listen to this stuff, and you're going to support saying, you have to wear a mask, you're bad because you're a white cop, and you did something, let me just give a quick example to this. The same day that the George Floyd verdict was handed down, there was a stabbing in Cleveland, Ohio. And this stabbing was the complete opposite type of case, in my opinion, compared to George Floyd. I don't have a problem with that verdict in Minnesota because Do I think that cop was racist? I doubt it. I don't see any evidence that he was actually racist, but he still killed someone unnecessarily. Now, some people will disagree with that and say, well, he died from a drug overdose or the effects of the drugs that he had taken. You know, the thing about it is, I agree that the cop basically did things that led to that man's death. I really don't have a problem with that verdict. You could say whether it's murder or manslaughter. That's the only thing you could really argue, though. And based on those state laws, you didn't have to have intention to be convicted with murder. So I don't have a problem with that. But in Cleveland, on the same day, there was a black girl that was going to stab another black girl. And the cops were called for that event. It's not like the cop just showed up. And the cop shot the black girl to death. Well, the one that actually was going to stab and hurt somebody else. Well, the problem is, of course, that cops have to be able to do that. And yet, the media treated it as if it was just the same type of thing. Because all that matters is the Marxist narrative. All that matters is you're an oppressor or you're oppressed. Doesn't matter whether you were going to hurt somebody else with a knife. Doesn't even matter if that person you were going to hurt was black. All that matters is the narrative. And so, if you watch something like this and you see the video coverage of George Floyd, for example, and then you see a story, well, this other person got got shot by a police officer in Cleveland, well, guess what? You're going to think, if you believe what the media tells you in general, you're not going to do your own research, and you're going to think that there's a systemic racism all over. Which, again, there is no establishment of the facts that say that any of these cops were really racist. Like, maybe they were. In the case of the cop, I can't remember his name, in Minnesota, maybe he was racist, but no evidence was actually brought up to show that. Because the evidence doesn't matter according to social justice, according to the leftist media. All that matters is the narrative. And so you see so many people now that just think, well, there must be this systemic racism. Let's not look at individual problems. Let's not look at what the police do and how the police have become militarized, and they no longer really serve the people. They just enforce the law. And I'm not going to get into that too much, but there have been Supreme Court cases that have flat out said the police have no obligation to protect you. Their job is to just enforce the law. And so as we've had this situation, of course the police are some police officers, even if it's just a minority of police officers, are using their power to go out and do whatever they want with people. So why is racism part of that equation? Maybe it is in some cases, but you actually have to show that to make that claim. But the media doesn't care. It's all, you're bad because you're a white cop. You're good because, you must be a victim because you were a black person, and it doesn't matter what you actually did. It doesn't matter whether you were going to hurt or kill somebody else. You're the victim here because that goes along with our ideology. That goes along with our agenda. And so, the people that can't break free from that, the people that can't say, well, wait a second now. This is what I'm supposed to believe. This is what the media is reporting. But does that actually make sense? Have we seen actual evidence? Did this person say racist things, right? Or is this just a result of a police officer being out of control? Is this a result of, a police officer doing their job? In the case of one person going, being prepared to stab somebody else. Well, they should have tased him. Yeah. No. Or it's also presented as, they shouldn't have shot that many times. Well, if someone's going to stab somebody else, you got to do what you need to stop that. And, shoot them once, they may stab the person anyway. So common sense, again, is the key factor here. Common sense and thinking for yourself. And my concern and my sort of, I guess, disillusionment with it all is that common sense has been so removed from people's thinking that you can just tell them whatever. Wear a mask, save lives. All cops are all racist, and men are bad. Women deserve more help. I mean, that's what you're taught on an everyday basis. That's the propaganda that you're given. And for the people that can't break free from that, and they don't, like I say, Trump is not giving the alternative message anymore. And I fear that people, even maybe some people that voted for Trump or whatever, they're just going to listen to what the media tells them, and they're not going to think for themselves, and they're going to adopt these Marxist ideas. There, even before the election, I've had people in my family and whatnot who I know that they are basically conservative people, that they have conservative views on things like abortion or whatnot, but yet they voted for Biden because the media told them to. And I just think that's going to get so much worse because, like I say, that middle ground, that sort of, well, we can still listen to Fox News, we can still listen to somebody else that'll give us a conservative point of view, that is shrinking. And people are either, I think that we're really on the cusp of people having to make a choice to either be a normie and adopt these Marxist ideas without even realizing that that's what they are, or think for yourself. And I'm afraid that a lot of people are just not going to choose to think for themselves through all this. Pulse Kebab, I'm sorry, I know you commented, a long time ago, and I got to being on a rant there. He says, "Hi, Dan. Home in 10 minutes, he says." Oh, I don't know whether that means he's going to continue to listen to my rant or not. John the Recluse says, "I'll never get vaccinated. A friend took it and got so violently sick for a day after doing so." Yeah, you just gave me an excuse to talk about that some more. I have had members of my family that got pretty sick, that felt like they had the flu for a couple of days at least afterwards. And then I've had people that said they got it and they were basically okay other than a sore arm. And that's pretty straightforward because, you go into the muscle with these shots. I will not get vaccinated. And my position is very simple. People need to decide for themselves, as I've been saying here, whether they think it's right for them. If someone believes that, I'm older or I have these health problems, I better, I don't want to get the coronavirus because I actually could have a hard time with this. I don't blame those people for getting the vaccine, right? If you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, what's the risk that the vaccine seems to pose versus the risk that the virus seems to pose? Those people that are already way ahead of everybody else, basically. Like if you're someone capable of thinking about it in that form, then you're already going to be in better shape. I don't have a problem with those people deciding to get vaccinated. The problem that I have is this whole presentation that, it's completely safe. It doesn't make people sick. The virus is the real threat. You're selfish if you don't get the vaccine. No. It can't possibly be safe completely because it was never put through the same series of tests that vaccines are supposed to go through. That's the issue that I have with it. Again, related to what I've said about the media and, people being so brainwashed and so incapable of thinking for themselves and doing these sort of risk assessments before they do something like getting a vaccine. My issue is that the media clearly lies. They say that it's safe. They know it's safe. They say that, all these people, it's like, it's just amazing. Like in the same news story, I saw where that one Johnson & Johnson vaccine was put on hold because it was making people sick. And on the other hand, it's completely safe. And they said that like literally at the same time. It's completely safe, but it's not safe. Like it's completely safe, except we're having messed up results as a result of this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's like, then it's not safe, is it? Like it doesn't make sense other than people just can't use common sense in that way. Pulse Kebab says, "I'm home now." That's good. I hope I gave you something halfway decent to listen to on your ride home. Pedrito says, "I'm about to lose a 6-figure job for refusing the vaccine. I've lost my health before and will not take the risk." Well, man, I hope that isn't what happens, or I hope that you can find something else that's almost as good. But yeah, it's just, I've pretty much made my mind up that I'm not getting the vaccine. I will not be forced to do something like this. I've done my own risk assessment. I don't see that the coronavirus is a threat to me. I have other health problems in certain certain sort of areas, but not anything that I can see is going to have, is going to make it to where the coronavirus is actually a threat to me, will actually make me really sick. But I can see that the virus is making people sick, or not the virus, the vaccine, in a lot of cases is making people pretty sick. Why do I need to go through that to supposedly protect other people? Right? Other people have been given the opportunity to protect themselves by choosing to get the vaccine or not. It just doesn't, again, you put any sort of level of thought to this and it doesn't make sense. And so I just, again, when the media is lying to you on an everyday basis and trying to pound home this idea that you have to get the vaccine, there's something bad going on with this, whether it's something in particular that the vaccine's supposed to do, or whether it's just about control and seeing whether they can force people to do this or not, so that they can again establish that level of control, so that, if anything goes on in the future, they can just make crap like this up and people will automatically believe that it's legit again. It could be sort of a test to see how much people are willing to take. I think that's what a lot of this coronavirus stuff has been. How much can we control the people? How much can we make people more dependent on the government by making these small businesses go down, while at the same time pretending to want to help them, when all we need to do to help them is to stop with all these restrictions? And, essentially just making the corporations, making it to where the people that have already the vast majority of wealth in this society even more wealthy and even more in control of the economy and of the culture. So, it's, to me, it's very, very dissuading. Like, it really makes me not want to have anything to do with a lot of what I'm seeing, in the sense of having hope that we can straighten things out. Like, most people are going to become Marxists. They're going to adopt these beliefs. They may not be all the way there at this point, but it seems to me that that's where it's going, because people aren't breaking free from this. And again, without Trump to represent them, even if that wasn't a good solution to begin with, a lot of people, they just don't seem to have the, whatever it is, the willingness or the ability to take a step back and say, you know what, this is all BS. This is all propaganda network BS. Like, there's no journalism left in the mainstream media. It's all agenda-based. And pretty much everything they say, unless you're looking at sports scores or maybe the weather report, unless they're lying to you about the weather too, it's all BS. Like, you can't trust any of it. It's all based on this idea of social justice, separating people out. And that's the last point I want to make on this topic, although let me get back into the vaccines again a little bit. Pedrito also says, the coercion is off the charts. I see no other path other than those not going with the Marxist narrative, being segregated from society. That's what I mean. It's like, at some point, there is no ability to be a so-called normie in greater society anymore. If you're going to think for yourself and you're not going to be a Marxist, we're quickly reaching that point. We're on the verge of that, where I feel, and this is, like I say, this is the main thought that I wanted to share with this, is I feel people aren't going to have a choice anymore. There's not going to be a middle ground. There's not going to be a way to, straddle the fence anymore. It's like, either you believe in general what the media tells you and you develop these Marxist views on things, or you break free from that. I really think that's what a lot of it is boiling down to pretty quickly here. Polska Bob says, hey, then I miss you, man. And indifference. Yeah. I'm just very inconsistent with when I do streams and make videos and stuff. But I have several videos planned that I actually want to record at once. So that'll give me some material for a while when I actually finally do it. Hey, TVOR's on here. How are you doing? How are you doing on the West Coast there? I guess this stream is probably more convenient for people on the West Coast doing it so late. TVOR says, smart man, it's gene therapy, not a vaccine. Coercion is against the Nuremberg Code. This is Nuremberg 2. Yeah, it's just, there's got to be something going on with this. Again, maybe we've already identified it. Maybe it's just about control in itself. But the effort that they go through, and it just doesn't make sense. It's like, why not just present the evidence? Why not just say, hey, only 2% of people that get this virus are going to die, and there's a greater percentage that may actually get really sick. And if you are older, you may want to get this vaccine. You may decide that you don't want it too, depending on how healthy you are, right? What problems you have with your health and what problems you don't have, right? Here's what the vaccine's doing. It's making people sick in some cases. Some people may be dying from it. But that's the risk-benefit analysis. Do your own research. These are your options. Why doesn't the media just present it that way? Rather than the whole, you must get vaccinated if you're a good person. You must do this. You must wear a mask everywhere. You're not a good person. It's crazy, but, it makes no sense. It makes no sense unless they essentially want to force people to get vaccinated at some point. Like, that's the only conclusion. They may or may not put it into law in certain places, depending on whether they think they can get away with it. But, it's crazy to not present it as it is and to deliberately mislead people on such a wide scale, right, throughout all the mainstream media, that it's just superior and better for you to get vaccinated even when the disease itself is not a threat to you. And like I say, in Ohio, over 30% of people have completed their vaccinations. All right, so why aren't the people who are really vulnerable the ones that are protected now, and why do we need to continue to wear a mask? Why do we need to continue to be so concerned with this? Right? Why does it matter what the new rate of infections are if the people that are really vulnerable to this disease have already had the opportunity to supposedly, from what we've been told, be cured from it? To not be vulnerable to it anymore. Well, the reason has to be control or something that we don't know about, like something like gene therapy. It could conceivably be something like that, for sure. Pedrito also says Chinese social credit system is the goal of the passports. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we're headed toward things like that, especially if people don't wake up, especially if people, and I've said this for a while now, this will go on, all of this SJW, coronavirus, you have to think this way, we don't accept you unless you're a leftist, basically. All this type of thinking, all this sort of rhetoric will just continue to dominate for as long as people put up with it. And unfortunately, I don't see an end in sight for that actually being changed. Like, I don't see enough people waking up to actually really do anything about that. Pulse Kebab says, I remember your video about indifference was one of the most powerful things we can ever do. It is. At a personal level and at a group level, definitely. That was more, I think, in context of men and women. But essentially, once you stop caring about something, if you can get it to where it doesn't affect you, there are things in life, of course, that you have to care about. If you have to work with someone, then you can't be completely indifferent. But when it comes to the things that you actually focus your life on, if you just withdraw your support or efforts from that, that says a lot more than continuing to engage in drama or continuing to allow that person to feed off your emotions. It's like, in the context that I put that in, especially, indifference, I've learned to use that in a lot of cases with people that were part of my past, but really weren't going to be a healthy part of anything in my future. Yeah, it's a very powerful tool in that sense. Let's see. Pedrito says, I've been enjoying your videos as well, Voice of Reason. Keeping up the great work. Yeah, I saw that, TVOR, I saw that you did a live stream on Odyssey. I haven't checked that out yet, but I haven't seen how that turned out, so... TVOR says, just chilling, watching movies. Thought I'd say hello. Appreciate it, man. So, you know, that pretty much, I think, covers what I wanted to say about how normies, if they continue to be normies, they're going to be Marxist. It's just, you know, the line between normies and NPCs is pretty darn thin these days. And maybe you could say those things could be defined the same way from the beginning. I don't know, but, you know, this idea of just trusting what the media tells you and... you know, not breaking free from the narrative, whatever that narrative is that you're sold, without Trump and his presence, and with, you know, Fox News and other supposedly conservative outlets being more and more diminished and less conservative over time. I just, you know, people are either they're gonna be forced to say, you know what, this is all BS, I'm gonna have to think for myself, or they're gonna get caught up in the storm. They're gonna be kind of... And if you have to be a normie, if you're one of those people that you can't deal with, you know, what we would call red pill stuff, if you have to have social approval, in other words, help, you know, God help you, because you're not going to be able to break free from this. You're going to have a real kind of internal crisis. If you can see what's going on, but you can't break free from overall society, you know, being something that you can interact with in a positive way, you're going to be in a bad spot. And I feel like a lot of people are just going to give up on that. They're just going to say, yeah, fine, whatever. Yeah, I'm bad because I'm a man. Yeah, you know, I'm bad because I don't just believe what we're told about racial issues or whatnot. You know, a lot of people are just going to be kind of alienated. And I guess the very last point that I wanted to make on that is I think that the media, I think that the government, the people that control, you know, the flow of information, I think they're aware of this, right? I think they know that this is going to continue to divide people. And that's a big part of their goal as well, to keep people divided so they don't realize how corrupt the government, how corrupt our economic system has become. And they keep blaming other groups of people instead of saying, wait a second, this whole system has been gamed by the elites. This whole system is not something that ordinary people are going to, you know, be able to be prosperous through. Whether you're looking at no-fault divorce and how that tears families apart, whether you're looking at, you know, lower wages for people based on illegal immigration, whether you're looking at all the racial stuff, rather than actually solving problems for all races, it's just, well, it's your group of people's fault because you oppress us. I mean, the people that actually oppress us, the people that have all the wealth and a lot of the control in society already, you know, they're dividing people intentionally. You know, that's a lot of what they're trying to do. But like I say, I just fear that we're on this sort of verge, on the cusp of, if you're a normie, you have a choice. You either accept Marxism or you stop being a normie. And I think a lot of people are going to be unable to step out of that within the very near future here. The second topic that I wanted to talk about, and this one is fairly different or separate, fairly separate from what I've just been talking about, is I've noticed more and more that people, especially conservatives, but not necessarily them exclusively, who are concerned about, constitutional rights, and they're concerned about basic things in the Bill of Rights in the United States, like freedom of speech and due process, and especially the right to bear arms in the United States is the one that, even more than free speech, people really seem to be passionate about one way or the other. There seems to be this, what I think is a misconception that I see more and more often, that the Constitution is going to be retracted, right? Like, well, we don't like freedom of speech, so we're going to repeal the First Amendment. I really just think that is silly, almost. Like, a lot of people think that that's how it's going to take place. It's like, well, they're going to repeal the Second Amendment, and then they're going to take our guns away. No, that's not the order of events that I see potentially happening, right? They're going to use other concepts to justify taking your rights away, and then only at the very end will there may be an attempt, when it's already the case, really, to actually repeal officially and legally parts of the Constitution, right? In general, it's not going to be, oh, we're just going to make sure that people don't have gun rights anymore, or let's get rid of the First Amendment because that gives people too much power in society, as individuals. That's not how it's going to take place. And it's mostly the left that's going to do this, although making that distinction, I guess it's still somewhat important, but the goal of our leaders, the goal of the elites, the people that have wealth and power and control over information in this society, is to basically replace our freedoms with opposite concepts, right? So instead of getting rid of free speech, we'll just label whatever we don't like as hate speech. Oh, that's hate speech. You still have free speech, right? You can still say whatever you want as long as it's not hate speech. Then you can't say it. Well, effectively, if you can label anything as hate speech, basically, and again, if all you have to do is sell the idea through the media, through the education system, through the government, that, well, you can't say this because it's hate speech and therefore it doesn't fall within your free speech protections, well, guess what? There really effectively is no right to free speech anymore. And the same idea can be applied to a variety of different things, like the right to bear arms. Oh, you have the right to bear arms, but, if someone says that you might commit a crime, we can take your guns away. That's the essence of what a red flag law is now, in most cases. And so, where is the right to bear arms with all this? And so all you have to do is keep people thinking that, well, there's going to be this attempt to repeal the Second Amendment, and we got to stop it. Well, these people, and I used to get in arguments, like I say, with conservatives with this before. It's like, you don't realize that that's not sufficient. You think as long as that Second Amendment right is there on paper, that somehow that means that you have the right to bear arms and it can't be infringed except for if someone decides to report you to the police as being potentially dangerous. Where does that really leave your right to bear arms in a practical sense? It means that those rights are going to be infringed on, and again, only at the very end, when no one has guns to resist it anyway, will that right officially be repealed. That's what I believe that's how it'll play out if things continue to deteriorate in terms of people's individual rights. The same thing can be true with due process, right? Oh, you have due process, but if someone Me Too's you, you're going to be assumed guilty, right? Oh, you've got due process rights. And right now in the criminal courts, it's still kind of there. I'm not saying we've gotten to a point where hate speech has completely trumped free speech or there is no right to bear arms whatsoever, but we're quickly heading in the direction where these things are being infringed on more and more often. And so ultimately what ends up happening is people get distracted thinking, well, they're going to try to take our right to bear arms away by repealing the amendment, or due process by saying, well, you don't need due process anymore, we're just going to throw you in jail. But that's not how it's going to come about. It's just going to be, well, this woman made a statement, and unless you believe in gender equality, and unless you believe in the Me Too movement, basically you're going to be, I should say it the other way around really, but if you support those things, then you have to support the idea of this man not having due process, right? Unless you believe in these things, you have to prove it. And unless you show that you believe in these things, then you're bad, right? You're for men hurting women. Well, the thing about that is, again, that effectively gets rid of your due process rights, especially if it gets to a point where all a woman has to do is point at a man and he goes to prison. We're already at that point when it comes to domestic violence laws and stuff like that. So, where is the due process? Oh, you have it on paper. You still have your due process rights. Look at the Fifth Amendment. But then at the same time, screw you. This woman made an accusation against you. We just need to believe her, and you need to go to jail. Or at the very least, you see this in the private sector of, you need to get fired. That's not the same thing, but that's the last point that I want to make on this whole idea of, the Bill of Rights being this thing that as long as the actual amendments are in there, as long as, the amendments to the Constitution, as long as the actual Bill of Rights is kept intact in terms of its writing, well, we still have our freedoms. The worst example that I've seen with this, and this is something that, especially anymore, as I've become more aware of how these things are going down, how these things are interpreted, or how they actually create results in the real world. The worst sort of example of this is the people that say, well, you've got free speech, but you're not protected from the results of your speech. Right. You're not protected from the results of your speech through free speech laws. So if, we execute you because of something that you said, well, you had free speech. You were allowed to say that. It's just that the consequence is you die. That's how absurd that argument is. People actually believe that crap. That somehow, and I'm being pretty, harsh and pretty straight up with how bad that argument is. And that's one thing I like to do sometimes is you use the worst possible example of something to show how something doesn't work. Or how it could work, I guess, in theory, if it was something that actually made sense. But it doesn't. If you're not protected from the results, from the unreasonable results of your speech, right? You can argue where you draw the line. Should people be allowed to get fired for saying something? Well, that might depend on exactly what they say. But at the same time, no. For the most part, you are protected from the results of your speech. If you're not protected from the results, people do things based on incentive. Right? If people know they're going to get their ass kicked for saying something, they effectively don't have free speech. That's just the reality of it. And so these people, these idiots that say this, what they're really saying is, I don't support free speech. Because the results of your speech, the consequences of your speech are the only things that matter. That's going to determine whether you say something or not. Like, the inverse of this could be true. You may not technically have free speech rights, but if you say whatever the hell you want to say and there's no punishment for it, then you have free speech, right? It's not really given to you by any particular wording, by any particular document. It's something that's either there or it's not, based on the practical consequences of saying certain things. Well, these morons that will say things like, well, you're not protected from the consequences of your speech, all they're saying is they don't support free speech, in essence. And, when I was younger, I didn't get that. I actually kind of bought that idea of, well, yeah, if you say something bad and someone punches you, that's kind of the results of your speech. And that's true up to a point. But if you're threatened with violence consistently, or, it's based on politics, it's based on, well, you're conservative, so you're fired for having these conservative points of view, because we don't tolerate that because we're woke as a company or a corporation or whatever, or as the government itself, whoever employs you in that situation, you don't have free speech. If you did, you wouldn't have that result. You have to be protected from unreasonable consequences of your speech. But people don't get that. People are in my view, really sort of, they're not thinking about it correctly when they think that, well, the First Amendment's still there, the Fifth Amendment's still there, the Second Amendment's still there, therefore we have our rights. Now I'm going to put my mask on and go out and pretend that, I have the right to make choices for myself as an individual. It's dumb. But people, again, this is something I see more often now. As I've stated, people just don't seem to think for themselves. That sort of common sense realization of, well, this is kind of like having voting rights in a communist country. It's like they don't really exist and everybody knows it, but yet technically you still hold elections. It's the same kind of thing here. It's like, it's not as extreme in some regard, although it kind of is when it comes to free speech and whatnot. If you have hate speech, you don't have free speech. If you have something like Me Too, you don't have due process, right? If you don't need evidence to actually support a claim against you. Or Title IX and how, people in college, they can basically, especially women, accuse a man of something and he has to prove his innocence. It's not due process. Well, it's not the same as in a criminal court. Well, that's true, but we're quickly heading there, where the criminal courts are going to probably be the same way if we keep going down this path. But, I don't know what the solutions to this are other than to prepare to have, the government continue to infringe on your rights to a large extent and for society to be very naive with this happening. But, it's just sad to me that people can't realize that the consequences are the only things that matter. The results are the things that are, determine whether you have a freedom or not. Right? Anybody can say you have free speech, but if we're going to throw you in jail for hate speech, you have no free speech. If we're going to take your guns away because someone said you might be dangerous because they don't like you, without any sort of evidence of crime or, planning a crime, you don't have the right to bear arms. If people can throw you in jail because a woman made a claim in a domestic violence case and, we don't have proof, but we have the Duluth model, so you go to jail as the guy. And if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about there, the Duluth model for domestic violence was basically, I'm not an expert at this, but I've heard it discussed many times. It's basically the pro-feminist view of domestic violence that has been in many places in the West. It's become the law in terms of cops arresting people for domestic violence. If there is a domestic violence call between a man and a woman, no matter what the nature of it was, the man goes to jail, right? If the police officer can't determine anything, the man is assumed to be guilty because men abuse women, and that's the nature of domestic violence. How is that due process? Well, it's not. It's completely incompatible with due process. But, I see a lot of people, they can't wake up to that. They can't realize, wait a second, these things are only meaningful in terms of the real world results, the real world consequences. And if essentially, you have free speech, but you're not protected against the consequences of your speech, well, screw you. That's the same thing as not having free speech, because the consequences are the only things that people really even think about, right? If you're going to get executed for saying something against the government, oh, you have free speech, you can say that thing. But then, after that, you're going to have a little accident. Well, you have no free speech. And I'm not saying things are to that point in our society. Again, that's just the most extreme type of example. But people just can't wake up and see that. They just want to repeat what they've heard from the media, from the education system. The education system might be the number one thing to blame from that, because I remember hearing that growing up about free speech all the time. You're not protected from, well, then what good is free speech? Where is free speech then? If, you're not protected from unreasonable consequences. And like I say, you could discuss where that is, what's reasonable and unreasonable. If you, are working somewhere and you threaten violence against people, or, you basically actually do things that are abusive or say things like, I'm planning on embezzling all this money from the company, yeah, they're going to fire you from saying something dumb like that. But it has to be reasonable. It can't just be based on politics. And like I say, a lot of people don't even see that there needs to be a line drawn in the sand where you need to be protected from the consequences of your actions, or your speech in this case, not really your actions, in order for free speech to mean anything. People don't seem to realize that. And I see this more and more often, where it's just, there's this lack of connection between seeing the Bill of Rights in the United States, just as an example, and realizing that that doesn't mean anything if the end result is that you don't have these rights anyway, right? It doesn't mean anything unless those rights are actually actively protected. And people don't see that. They just see, well, we've got the right to bear arms, so our guns, we're going to fight. And it's like taking away officially taking away your right to bear arms will be the last thing that our government does, or that the elites in some form do. You effectively won't have your weapons before your right to bear arms is taken away. And a lot of people can't see that that's, in my view, that's the order of events that's going to take place. But, that's why, like I say, I've argued with conservatives with a pretty negative result in the past, that, they'll say, well, the right to bear arms protects against tyranny. It's like, only if you actually have those weapons. Only if you really have the right to bear arms. But I think a lot of people, a lot of conservatives especially, they're going to wake up one day and they're going to look around and realize, yeah, you've got your Bill of Rights, but you don't actually have any of those rights in a practical sense. If you have red flag laws, like I say, somebody can say, oh, you're dangerous, and you can have your guns taken. How do you have the right to bear arms? Why are you trying to defend the Second Amendment in that sense when it's already being taken away? I'm not saying you shouldn't want to defend those rights or have that position, but you've got to look at what's actually going on in the real world. And a lot of people don't seem to think that way. They seem to think that protecting the Bill of Rights itself is enough, while hate speech, red flag laws, Me Too, all these things continue to develop and become more extreme over time, until I really fear that people are going to wake up one day and it's like, oh, they officially repealed the Second Amendment today. We didn't have any guns left anyway, so no one's going to resist. But, somehow it protected us against tyranny within, that document. I don't think it's going to work that way. Pedrito says, it's like watching a slow motion train wreck with the way the media and politicians are moving the narrative forward. Yep, it's sad. And, it's slow, but it's not slow compared to, what's led up to this point. Since Trump has become president, I think it's really sped up. Or maybe we're just at that scene where the train is officially going to derail now. I don't know. Maybe the pace hasn't increased, but we're just almost there. I don't know. It's sad that this is kind of the circumstances that we face now. And like I say, I don't have the answers to this. I just wish people were able to see what's going on and to think for themselves more. Pedrito Navaja also says, divide and conquer, destroy natural rights, demonize the demographic most likely to oppose you. Absolutely. Label them as the oppressors all day long. And we all know that, for the most part, the demographic most likely to try to stand up for Western values and ideas are white, male, conservative, straight people. White men who have generally conservative views, not necessarily just in terms of politics, but in terms of having the old school values, the Western values, who don't buy into all the SJW BS. Pedrito also says, and before you know it, you're being pulled out of your house in the middle of the night, headed for the gulag. Yep, because you're not protected against your free speech. It's like, you can say what you want, but you go to the gulag afterwards. That's free speech. So a lot of people think that it is. If you follow what they're actually saying when they say things, and I've heard this many times, of, You can say what you want. You have free speech, but you're not protected from the results of your speech, from the consequences of your speech. Well, that justifies throwing someone in the gulag, doesn't it? But people can't, they just don't see it. They think somehow that if the government punishes you, that's different, and that's where the line should be drawn. Well, it's like all the government has to do is pay other people to do it for them. And it's just like, oh, that makes it okay. You've got free speech, but if this gang of thugs wants to make you pay for what you've said, that's okay too. It's just, I give such ridiculous examples because the argument that you shouldn't be protected from the consequences of your speech is ridiculous, right? Unless it's a reasonable consequence, not, well, you get fired and lose your livelihood. I would argue that unless you really say something that caused that to happen because it was really threatening people or really that awful, in general, you shouldn't be fired for your speech. You shouldn't be allowed to be fired for your speech. People don't think that way. They think that somehow those rights will continue to magically be protected if we just have the First Amendment officially be the law of the land, or the Second, or the Fifth, or the Eighth. It doesn't matter, that people will still have these rights somehow, and that's just not the way that I see it working. These are going to be the last things that are done, if they're done at all, right? When all your rights are taken away, then they'll be repealed. That's the way I see it going down, and it seems like a lot of other people just don't think that way for some reason. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Democrats will try to repeal the Second Amendment in a serious way, but I mean that's not the way to do it. And I think they're smart enough. Maybe not someone like Biden, but someone like Kamala Harris they're smart enough to realize that's not the way to do it, because people will then all of a sudden see it. A significant number of people will. But if you just slowly erode away at their rights and say, oh, you have the right to bear arms, until someone makes a claim that, you're dangerous and then we can take your guns away based on nothing but that, essentially your right to bear arms is not really there anymore. Once you stand up for yourself in some way, if you feel like you have to, then all of a sudden you could be labeled a threat, and now you have to give up your guns. I mean, it's crazy to think that preserves your right to bear arms, but a lot of people, even a lot of conservatives, seem to kind of be at that point. They seem to think that way. So, like I say, guys, I just see that happening, people saying that more often. Things like, well, you're not protected from the consequences of your speech. Well, then what the hell good is the First Amendment? It's like, what good is that? People don't seem to think that way. Again, a lot of it is just the indoctrination. People don't stop and use common sense and think for themselves, even at a basic level when it comes to these things. And in my opinion, and they don't connect the dots. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, and I've kind of alluded to this, or I've really sort of talked about this to some extent, and the issue of it is, what is the result of a lot of the stuff that we see going on now, policy-wise, and in terms of our culture and all the stuff that's going on? What is the result of this kind of divide and conquer, label people as oppressors or oppressed people? What is going to happen? Now, it's interesting to see these parallels, and maybe I'm kind of slow at realizing these sort of comparisons, but you look at something like men going their own way. What is men going their own way primarily a result of? Why are a lot of men choosing that path, choosing that philosophy? Now, there are somewhat different reasons that you can cite, and some men are really sort of geared toward that mindset to begin with, but why is something like MGTOW growing so quickly? And this also relates to what I've mentioned with indifference in the past, or even in this video. It really boils down to when you can have no positive effect, when it makes no sense to really actually engage with women in marriage or having a family. And some people may agree or disagree with me on this, but to me, one of the main sort of precepts of MGTOW is just that women are nothing but trouble for men today in most cases, right? Whether you think there are exceptions here or there or they're not, it's basically a situation where men have realized there's no positive result from dealing with women in the way that society expects us and that women expect us to deal with them, right? And I've mentioned this before, and I don't think I need to go into this too much, but women, as a result of this, are not taking a step back as a whole. Some of them are, but most of them, they're not saying, well, we need to be a lot more reasonable, right? We need to have a completely different way for men and women to interact with one another in order for anyone's interest to really be met, especially men's, but, they don't really, in a lot of cases, care about men anyway. But a lot of them are not taking a step back and realizing how one-sided the relationships / friendships / everyday interactions between men and women tend to be. And so, what is the sort of result that we're seeing between men and women? It's that men are looking at it and saying, yeah, there's nothing positive I can do here. There's no way to get around no-fault divorce. There's no way to get around the Duluth model for domestic violence. There's no way to really heal any of this. I can't change this. Society has become too female-centric, too much about pleasing women, and so it doesn't make sense to even try to engage in this process with women. And so men are saying, you know what, I'm out. I'm done. And, you can do whatever. You can think that men are bad. You can blame men for all your problems. Yeah, and I would say most women to some extent are still doing this. They're still blaming men for a lot of their problems. They expect men to still meet these standards that men have no reason to want to meet anymore. And so men are just looking at it and like, okay, you can have that. Bye. In some form or fashion, right? Some men may still want to date. Some men still may want to get laid. Some men will go monk. There are different sort of particular specific responses to this. But basically, the result is men are done with this. We just don't care. If we realize what's really going on between men and women today and how obsessed society is with taking the woman's side on everything, we're just not going to take part in these sort of one-sided interactions / relationships / marriages, whatever, with women. Well, what do you think the police are going to do in black neighborhoods? And that may sound like something that's really disconnected, but again, maybe a lot of people have connected the dots with this, and I'm just slow. What do you think the police are going to do when it comes to policing, patrolling, sort of trying to enforce the law in black communities? Especially communities that have shown that they are all about BLM, they're all about, we're oppressed by white cops. What do you think cops are going to do? Especially white cops, but really police forces in general. They're going to stop helping you. They're going to stop helping black people. They're just going to say, all right, we're oppressors, we're bad, have at it. We're not going to continue to put ourselves in danger in a situation where there can be no positive outcome. And that's why I mentioned earlier where the same day as the George Floyd verdict came in, or I can't remember the police officer's name that got convicted. That's why I'm calling it the George Floyd case. The same day that happened, there was a stabbing in Cleveland, just to mention it again, where a black woman had a knife and was about to stab another black girl, and a police officer killed her before she could do that. Shot her and killed her. And yet, this white cop is bad. And, I've heard that LeBron James even tweeted something like, you're next. Like, an obvious threat that if you were a white person and said that about a black person, you would be instantly kicked off your team. But because it's LeBron James and he has so much talent and he's part of the so-called oppressed group of people, despite all the millions of dollars that he's made, that's ultimately, the situation where what are you supposed to do as the cop there? Really, he did everything right. He protected someone that was black from getting stabbed by somebody else who was black. But he's still the oppressor, isn't he? Well, you know what that means? There's only one reasonable conclusion. There's only one logical way of handling these situations if you're a police department or if you're a cop. You just don't intervene. You just let these people, and by these people, again, I'm not saying that strictly on race, but any group of people that thinks that they're, oppressed by society, you just let these people do whatever they want to do, right? We already know that black people commit crimes against other black people way more than white people do, especially violent crime. So who's going to lose out in this situation? Well, all the cops need to do to not lose, the only way to not lose, is to just not patrol these areas and not police, these neighborhoods. So what do you think is going to happen? They're going to stop caring. MGTOW Values, how are you tonight? I'm sorry, I see you've been commenting, but I kind of wanted to get through that description there. It's not a right to bear arms. It's the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. That's right. And yet these rights are constantly being infringed upon, and no one's doing anything about it really, other than talking and saying how important the Second Amendment supposedly is. Well, a lot of these conservatives, they'll support things like red flag laws. They'll be like, well, I'm moderate, I'm reasonable. So, and the thing about it is, I'm not against, and I'm sure some people will disagree with me on this. I'm not against things like, registering your guns. I'm not against things like common sense precautions and requirements. But if you're clearly going to have your guns taken away from you as soon as somebody says, oh, you're going to hurt me, or you're going to hurt these other people, we need to make sure that you can't do that. How is that the right to, how are your right to bear arms, how are those rights not being infringed upon? I mean, it makes no sense to think that the result isn't any different than not having the right to bear arms in the first place, or, not being protected against that infringement. MGTOW Values also says it is, I think, not only engaging with women, but with the whole gynocentric community. Yeah, I think I kind of try to describe that too, with what I was saying, that, it's the environment, it's the terms that men are given. It's like, well, you need to agree to these terms. You have all the responsibility, women have all the authority. Those are basically, in short form, the terms. Well, that's nice. Why should any man want to be, signed up for that? There's no positive result that you can have from that, except just saying, you know what, I'm going to go my own way in some form or fashion. And MGTOW Values also says, I like this, as a result that men can have no positive result with the community, therefore shall be indifferent to the direction of the community. Exactly. Right? It's like, why should you invest? Like, why should you have any sort of feeling for what even happens? It's like, if there's no difference in the long run between trying to be a good guy and having a woman divorce you anyway and take your kids anyway and, get some sort of false domestic violence claim on you anyway without even being tried in a criminal court, why in the world, if that can still easily happen and society will have that woman's back, why in the world is that any better than just avoiding women or, treating women in a rude way? Like, why in the world should you invest in that when your result is actually going to be worse than if you just treat women like crap? Then at least they want to sleep with you if they find you attractive in the first place. And I'm not suggesting that men or anybody should do that for its own sake. It's just the end result is that there is no positive outcome. The only positive outcome is to not play the game. And the same thing is true with cops today when it comes to policing black neighborhoods. If you've got all this whole racial, strife in the sense that you're oppressed if you're black and you're bad if you're a white cop, then why would you even engage in that? Why wouldn't you just avoid that whole scenario? That's clearly the only reasonable choice. Cyberpunk will be the result, MGTOW Value says. I've never played that game, but I've seen. I know it's like an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic type of thing, but yeah, it's not going to be pretty the way that it turns out. I'm glad you're enjoying the discussion, though. I really didn't prepare a whole lot of notes and stuff like this, but I had a pretty good idea of just where things are with all this. It's just crazy to me that, well, it's not crazy in a way, because again, the whole goal is to divide people, right? And so if you make it to where cops feel like there's nothing positive they can do in black neighborhoods, you make it to where men realize that, you know what, I'm just going to pass on asking a woman out. I'm going to pass on trying to build a family. No, it's just not, basically, it's just not something you can do in a positive way. There's not going to be any sort of result that you want to achieve. Then you're just not going to do it. And you're going to see the same thing with other groups of people, right? It's like there are areas in Europe, I think in London in particular, where there are no-go zones based on religion and culture, based on basically you have these kind of Islamic enclaves where they've taken control of areas in the cities. And I haven't verified this, to be fair, but why would you police those areas either? It's like, if you're being told that, well, Islam's the religion of peace and you can't say anything bad about Muslims. And I've even seen where, if you even post something on Facebook or Twitter that says something bad about Islam, you can be indicted in the UK for that. Well, okay, cool. They're the victim class. We can do no good, so let them deal with it. Again, the goal for a lot of this is to just create as many separate groups as possible. MGTOW Value says the underclass was created on purpose, part of the prison industrial complex. Yeah, you see things like private prisons and some of the crimes that people get convicted and thrown in prison for. It's just it's really absurd. But, I'm not an expert at that, other than at a basic level I can see what's going on, that all of it is to basically enrich the people that have control over this society and to punish people that don't go along with it. So the terms of a one-sided social contract, right? That's basically, and there have been other people like Hammerhand talk about how there is no table for the social contract. I think that's really relevant too. But, I've also described it as a stalemate. In the video that I've actually made that for whatever reason got the most views, there's a stalemate because men have no reason to want to participate and women have no inclination to change anything for the better, right? It's just like, well, you need to continue to man up. And it's just like, nah, we don't need to do anything because dealing with you is toxic in a general sense between men and women now. And it's the same with with all these other SJW causes, like all these other dichotomies between oppressor and oppressed groups. Ultimately, if there's nothing that the oppressors can do, even if they wanted to actually make things work, then why deal with you at all, right? And it's like, again, if protecting a black woman from getting stabbed is going to make you an oppressor, then why would you even put yourself in that position to begin with? It just makes no sense to be in that situation once you realize that that's what's coming, once you realize that that's what you get for trying to enforce the law in black neighborhoods, that you're going to be blamed for protecting someone who's black because the narrative is that you're the oppressor anyway in that situation. Well, that's fine. We won't deal with you. TFM as well, years ago, mentioned that, where cops in Chicago, I think he did a news story on that, they're just not going to the bad areas and to the ghettos in the city because no matter what they do, they're not seen as doing anything positive anyway. So just, this isn't anything new. It's just gotten so much worse with the BLM, crazy leftist media propaganda and just all the nonsense. It's gotten so much worse over the last few years, and especially now that the left has complete control over the state pretty much. Not that that wasn't already present to begin with for the most part. Trump, I think him having so-called power was an illusion. It was something to distract conservatives so that they wouldn't see how far gone the situation was, I think. But like I say, I mean, they're able to just sell these extreme ideas so easily to the average normie person that I just, there's really nothing to do for the people that are aware of what's going on other than to just disengage. Let me read some more of MGTOW Value's comments here. Cyberpunk is not a game, it's a social theory. Yeah, I don't know enough about it to really know. It's a genre of literature, dystopia. Okay, so I need to read up on that because I don't really have too much knowledge on what that actually means. I've seen Stardust and some others refer to that. I thought it was actually like a series of games that they came up with some sort of in-universe thing about, but that shows you how far off I was on that. MGTOW Values also says, if there is no positive result generally, then a man will seek a positive result for himself. Exactly. It's just find other things that you can actually do. And this is one of these things where it's actually just human nature. People don't do things if they don't think there's an incentive, a positive result that can happen, or an incentive to actually try to achieve by doing that. I would say even for women, more of it is emotion-based rather than, signifying or acknowledging objective reality. But people do things based on wanting to achieve something positive, even if it's utterly selfish or whether it's selfless. It's like you want to achieve a goal that you see as good. Well, if you can't do that, the end result for people that are intelligent enough to see it for what it is to just disengage. That's the only thing that can happen. And like I say, I think the elites in our society, the people that have control over the narrative in our society, they know this. They just don't care. That actually furthers their goal of continuing to divide people so that they can establish more control over society. Having no generally positive results, MGTOW Value says, shared among all players results in a stalemate. Stalemate results in Law 5 coming to the fore. Yeah, exactly. I probably couldn't have put it in those words, but with women and men, it's particularly stark, and it's because of just women being told their whole lives that they can have it all. Like, the result is more extreme, at least for now, but we're heading down that path when it comes to all the other groups of people that I mentioned. Of course, there was this attempt recently to try to bring Asian people into the fold on the oppressed side. In general, Asians have not been labeled as an oppressed group, but since that one guy went into a massage parlor and decided that he was going to off some people, and since a lot of them, this is what I heard happen. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong on some of this, but they happened to be mostly Asian people working there because it was a sexually illicit massage parlor. And this guy had certain views on that and had was basically mentally ill when it came to those issues, and decided that he was going to, like I say, off some of those people. And so they happened to be mostly Asian, and now it's convenient to sell the story that Asian people are victims too. Look at how this crazy guy, it's domestic terrorism. Maybe we should take gun rights away from these kinds of people. I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound like I think I know everything that's going on, because I don't. But when you're even at a basic level aware that the media has adopted the SJW Marxist way of thinking, it's clear that this was just a ploy to get the Asian group of people on the side of the oppressed so that you can have one more group of people to use to try to get them to support taking other people's rights away, right? That's once most people in society want to be seen as oppressed and they want the government to basically take care of them, there's nothing standing in the way of communism. There's nothing standing in the way of the whole house of cards finally coming down, so to speak, in a way that most of our leaders support. So to me, that was obvious when that happened, that it's just like, well, wait a second. Why would the media not want to report how this was basically an Asian massage parlor, or primarily Asian to begin? Oh, because that's not their agenda. They're going to leave that out so that people also think, well, I'm Asian. Maybe I'm a victim too. That now, whether that works or not, I have my doubts, because a lot of Asian communities tend to be in a better state than other groups of people that have been sort of manipulated by the government for decades, if not centuries. But, I don't know. It's just another attempt to continue that oppressed versus oppressor paradigm. I need a drink. MGTOW Values also says, when division becomes so obvious and so extreme that a majority of men see it openly, then division will lose its power over controlling men. In other words, there is a limit to divisionism. I'd say that's true, yeah. At the same time, the propaganda is so strong that, the gynocentric, female-centric way of looking at things is so powerful, and it's bolstered by our natural instincts, our biology being used against us so much. And really, I don't want to make it out to sound like women are victims here, because they're not. They have the benefit of, at least in the short run and the medium run of society, and in the long run in terms of social programs of society telling them, they can have it all. But that really fits into their hypergamy. That fits into their, weaknesses as well, their biology as well. Tell them they can have it all, that they should be in control of men, and then everything is men's fault when they don't get their way, and the government needs to step in and take men's due process rights away. Again, it's all part of the due process, free speech, anything you want to look at. It's all part of extracting wealth, taking men's rights away, and using biology against people. In a lot of ways, it really should be obvious to men how bad things have gotten, but it's not, because there is so much propaganda and so much force on the other side that it's almost creating a black hole of knowledge. It's almost so powerful that it's just like nothing can escape the female-centric way of thinking almost. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic about it. Maybe more men will start to wake up, but a lot of men just, they want to continue to pander to get, females' affections and to get laid, frankly. That MGTOW Value says, that massage parlor shooter was a deeply religious sex addict. Right, that's basically what I heard, that, I would call that mentally ill, and was shooting up the sources of temptation. Had nothing to do with most of the women being Asian, apparently. That's what I heard as well. The whole racial thing, it's clear that whole stop Asian hate thing, that's the main, unless there was something else that came from that I didn't see, that's the main source of that. And it's obvious that it's bullshit. It's obvious once you look into the details of what happened that that's a cultural thing. A lot of the massage parlor workers are Asian, and that's something they have going on in their culture. Although, to be fair, it's probably not fair to say, Asian culture as a whole is one cohesive, one sort of unified culture. But, that's something that comes from various parts of Asia, various individual cultures within the Asian community. So, that's why there were mostly Asian there. And so when that occurred, it's clear that it wasn't really based on race, but it was just an effort to bring the Asians into the Marxist fold. That to me is like, when I first heard about that, I'm like, what is this about? Because Asian communities are generally known to, like, they're pretty successful, and so they aren't really susceptible to this brainwashing so much. That's why, in my opinion, there hasn't been a greater effort to label Asians as an oppressed group, right? Because they're more resistant against that. But when I heard that, it was just like, why are they making this move now? And then I realized, oh, they're just distorting the facts because they've decided that it's time to basically bring them into the equation. It's really straightforward once you see the bigger picture, but people just can't. Like I say, I don't think I'm all that smart with all this, but people can't get to a point where they're thinking for themselves in the first place, and so they just stay in the dark. It's just, there are a lot of things I'm sure I'm not aware of, but come on, it's like if this was a massage parlor and this was about, being a sex addict and being religiously against it at the same time and having, this mental anguish as a result of that, then that was clearly the reason, not the race aspect of it, not them being Asian. McTow Value says, yes, he was mentally ill. Yeah, I would say, when when you don't have the ability to resist those things and you have this rigid view of how, I'm somewhat religious myself, but the actions I take, I know that they're my own choices. Somebody that can't do that is going to be mentally ill when there's such a great contrast between belief and action. So, there's not much to say about that, I guess, but they didn't even report it like that. Even if they wanted to report it as, hey, don't be a goof when it comes to being a religious sex addict, even if they wanted to report it like that is some sort of, semi-anti-religious thing or being that crazy type of thing, that wouldn't have been a bit, really the way they should report it is, we need to do something about mental illness. But no, that's not convenient. It's so much more convenient to make it about race to try to again, further the leftist agenda. Pedrito Navaja says that shooter also killed a couple of white women, but that was conveniently left out of the media. Of course. It's just one of these things where if people would just think for themselves at a basic level, they could see this stuff. But like I say, a lot of it, and this is what I mentioned in the first part of the video, it comes down to a choice. Like, we're getting to a point now, or maybe we're already there. We're on the cusp of the situation where you have to make a choice between being a normie or actually thinking for yourself, right? And to some extent, things have been that way in terms of, if you want to call blue-pilled people normies, that's accurate too. But in the sense that, the people that tried to remain normies while also supporting someone like Trump, they tried to remain normies while at the same time watching the mainstream news media and just disagreeing with a lot of it. We're to a point where you just have to reject that shit. Like, your only choice, like, Trump can no longer be the focal point on the right, and there's no one left really to tell you, hey, these are the conservative beliefs, or these are the right-wing beliefs. Now, everything that you are sold, unless you're going to alt media, is leftist Marxist propaganda now. Everything that's politically related, everything that's related and essentially dealing with politics in our culture, in our society's wellness, or the trajectory of our society as a whole, which is not good. Either you believe what the media tells you in a basic sense, or you don't. And even, like I say, Fox News and all them, they're going to get they're just basically controlled opposition. They're going to get swallowed by the left eventually. And I don't know what people will do. Like, again, it's very difficult to straddle that fence between trying to be a normie and trying to care about the truth, or care about, having a sort of objective point of view when it comes to politics and stuff like that, all the related things. It's going to be impossible to do that. You either have to just reject what the media is telling you, or you accept it, and if you accept it, it's just a matter of time before you develop Marxist ideas on things. Everything is about that now. Everything is about, do you fit into the oppressor or oppressed categories? We don't really care about what actually happens. We don't really care whether there's any evidence that this person was racist. This white cop shot a black person, shot a black man, or shot a black woman in the case of Cleveland a while back. Therefore, we're going to riot. Therefore, we're going to have these supposedly mostly peaceful protests. All that nonsense. It's like, either you realize it's nonsense and reject it, or you're going to be enveloped by it. I think if you continue to digest that stuff from the mainstream media. MGTOW Values also says a clear and helpful and powerful distinction between belief and action. Yep. Relating to that shooter with the massage parlors, I assume. And he also says, gotta run, great discussion. Take care, man. Take care, men. Yeah, I appreciate you continuing to comment, MGTOW Values. One day we'll do a stream. We'll get it scheduled or worked out, and I'll do a stream with you probably at some point. I know we've discussed that for years now, but for whatever that's worth. But, there is one sort of idea that I wanted to wrap things up on. I've been going at it for like almost an hour and 45 minutes. And I don't know whether some of you guys feel this way. This is kind of more of a personal point. But it seems like some days I realize what's going on here in an abstract sense, but it's just like some days I feel like I must be out of my mind. Like, to see the things that are going on at a basic level that other people seem to miss out on, or other people just, they just don't even consider. Like, for example, why are people wearing masks if 30% of the people have been vaccinated and these have been set aside, these vaccinations, even if you're all for people getting the vaccines? This has been set aside for the 30+% of people in Ohio, that's where I'm getting that percentage, who have already had their full vaccinations. They've already gone through the full process. If 30% plus of people have gotten the vaccines and 2% of people actually pass away from this virus, why are we still wearing masks? Why are we still doing this? And again, the point that I could grant is that, well, there might be a few people that don't think they'll get sick, or they're not in the at-risk groups, but they still end up getting really sick from the virus. Okay, fair enough. But that's going to be way less than 1% of the population now. It was only 2% to begin with. 2 to 2.5% of people who get the coronavirus die. And we know that it's almost exclusively, with a very few number of exceptions that the media, of course, likes to highlight and pretend like it's the norm rather than the exception. We know it's older people and sicker people that get this virus and pass away from it. Most younger, healthier people, a lot of them, there are way more people that don't even know they have it or had it than there are people that have serious symptoms from it. Right? When all this started out, we saw all these news stories about people, I had the virus and didn't even know. I thought I had a cold, or I didn't have any symptoms. And then I got tested and I was positive, and it got confirmed. I had the virus. It's like, notice those stories went away pretty quickly because it wasn't consistent with the narrative that the media decided they wanted to sell, which is fear, right? The narrative of fear, that this virus is so terrible and everyone's basically at risk for it. But it just makes no sense. Like, why are we still going through this whole process if it's not about control? Why are we going through this process of 30% of people having the full dosages of the vaccine, but 2% of people actually being at risk from dying? How does that make sense? You've got 15 times the number of people that will die compared to the number of people that have been supposedly protected from this virus. How does that make sense? Why don't we just forget about it, honestly. Like, not in an absolute sense, but in the sense of policy. Why do we need to still have policies to try to curtail this virus that clearly don't work to begin with? Because there's still all kinds of new infections, supposedly, new people being, infected with the virus on a daily basis. It's not much better now than it was a year ago in terms of new cases. So what is the point? Why are we not essentially protected from this at this point? Well, because that's not the idea that the media wants to sell. And like I say, on a more personal note, I just feel sometimes like I've lost it. Like, why is it that, I can't either get through to people, or, why is it that my thinking is so much different on this? And I tell myself it's because I'm using common sense and actually thinking for myself, and I feel like that's true, but I just feel like sometimes that I'm the one that's off because I don't see where this makes any sense whatsoever, right? And of course, your mainstream media propagandized person, if that's a word, the person that has been completely propagandized toward what's happening, they're going to look at you and act like you're stupid if you tell them what should, in my opinion, be a common sense view of what's going on. And so sometimes, guys, I feel like I'm the one that's losing it. I feel like I'm making more of an effort to think these things out, but somehow, am I reaching the wrong conclusions on this? I know that a lot of my subscribers will probably say that I'm not anyway, but sometimes I just think that I live in an alternate reality. Like, and TVOR was on here earlier, and I've seen him say things that I think are similar, where it's just like he says that he doesn't even recognize the country that he's living in now. He doesn't recognize Canada as what it used to be, as what it should be, as what he thought that it was. And maybe that's the same kind of thing that I'm seeing here. I think it really is. It's just, when did the United States, when did people in Ohio become so fucking stupid? And I know a lot of people that are on the coast will say, well, that's because you're all a bunch of inbreds and rednecks. And yeah, that's probably true. But, why? Why is it so hard for people to... if my thinking is different, why is it that I can realize these things and other people can't? If I'm not the one that's crazy. Sometimes I think that I am, not seeing something, right? Not seeing something that's important to factor into all this. But, I try to be really objective, and I know that I'm not always right, but to me, it's just even a basic effort to see things for what they are is just not taking place for most people anymore. Pedrito says, I don't think you're losing it, Dan. When the truth starts to look monstrous, most people cannot contend with that reality. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe people... I wanted to mention that type of thing as well. I'm glad that you said that. Not only because you helped me feel like I'm not going crazy, but one thing I've noticed with this mask mandate stuff in particular is that people are starting to finally get fatigued from all this. I have seen a lot more people over the last couple of months, even though the propaganda is stronger now than it's ever been, right? You need to get vaccinated. You need to wear a mask. It's so bad out there. The numbers are so high because these people won't wear a mask. I think a lot of people, maybe one part of the answer to what I've been talking about here is that people are aware at some level, maybe even consciously aware at some level, that this is all bullshit, but they know that they can't contend with it. Like you say, they know that they're going to be ostracized. They know that they're going to suffer negative consequences, and so they have to pretend like they believe in it. And that's one of the hallmarks of totalitarianism, to be honest. It's like, if that's the case, then indeed we're in a really bad spot with what's, with the issues that we face in our society. I just, maybe that's a big part of it, right? Is that people do know, but they don't feel like there's anything they can do about it, or it's too much to contend with. There's a good possibility that that's at least part of it, yeah. But, it's just some people they seem to be swept up in this stuff. Like I mentioned, where that girl got shot in Cleveland when she was going to clearly stab somebody else. I've heard a lot of people, like I said, people in my family, and I these are people that I love and care about, but they just have such a ridiculous sort of appraisal of it. It's things that just really don't make sense. Like, I get where they're coming from, but it just doesn't add up. Like, one member of my family who, like I say, is very important, someone that I care about a lot, someone that, I love very much, they said, well, the cop shouldn't have shot her that many times. I guess he shot her like 5 times with that situation, with the knife girl in Cleveland. Knife girl. Unfortunately, there are too many of those knife girls. But, it's like, what the heck? Like, you're about to stab someone. And your job, really, it's not even your job. Again, police aren't really necessarily required to protect people. But it's clear that, a police officer is really supposed to try to protect people from getting stabbed. That's what police officers should be doing to begin with. Like, he was doing his job by responding to the incident and not allowing that to take place where there was a murder, right? You're not going to shoot them once and hope they drop the knife. That's ridiculous. You're going to do what you have to do based, it's good, I guess, if you can save that person's life. But, and the sort of counter argument that I gave was that when my family member mentioned this opinion was that, well, when someone does something like that, they're not respecting another person's life. So at that point, why are you obligated to not take them out? Right? That's the way from a moral standpoint, that's kind of my philosophy on that, even though it's really kind of irrelevant in this case, is that if you're going to devalue somebody else's life for no reason, like they're not trying to hurt you physically, you're not defending yourself, then why should your life be valued? I think when people do those kinds of things, in that moment, they're sacrificing, or they're sort of voiding what would normally be their human rights. But it's not even like, that's me trying too hard to, like, really, that's not the reason why the cop did the right thing. The reason is his job is really to protect somebody, or it should be, right? If you're responding to that situation, you don't just let the girl with the knife stab that person, right? If there's a positive sort of function that you can have in that situation in the first place. But like I said, a lot of these cops are going to realize, I'm not going to go in the black neighborhood, or if there's something that goes on, if you're being forced to patrol a black neighborhood, first of all, you're going to have to use black cops all the time now. But even then, they're going to try to make out that sort of victim versus oppressor dichotomy. They're going to say, well, these black cops, they're, the Uncle Ruckuses, or the sort of the tools of the white cops. So they're just as bad. That's probably the argument. Some form of that will probably be put out there as an argument to say, well, they're still the oppressors, even if they're black, even if they're of the same race. But honestly, it's just their whole purpose of being there was to stop something like a murder from happening, and he did. The cop did that. You're not going to shoot them once or twice and hope that stops the person. It's like, well, hopefully they'll drop that knife. Hopefully that'll be enough to stun them, and then maybe they'll live, and maybe everything will turn out all right. Or you just don't protect the criminal. You don't protect the person that wants to kill somebody else. You do what you have to do in that situation. Like, to me, that's totally the right thing to do. Not, try to limit how many times you shoot them. That's just bad policy. It's bad moral philosophy as well, in my opinion. And like I say, the person that who said this is a morally good person. Like, this is someone that, has always treated me well and that I have a good relationship with, for sure. Someone that I care about a lot. But because the media and this person watches news on TV a lot, because they're told that message, it's just like, oh, it's just part of the police brutality. It's just like George Floyd. It's just like all these other things. It's like, nope. It's just, people just don't think for themselves. Like I say, sometimes I make it too complicated. I think too hard about it. When in reality, it's pretty simple. You don't let someone stab somebody else if you're a good police officer. That's the way it goes. But and just to sort of wrap this up, even though this isn't directly tied into anything that I've really wanted to discuss here, but there was also an incident where a white female officer accidentally pulled her gun instead of her taser and shot someone. That, if the media would present that for what it really is, what they would say is, this is incompetence. This is being incompetent as fuck. It's not about race. It's not about... I guess you could make the case that it's about gender. You can question whether the female officer really had to meet the standards that the male officers did to become, to be in that position. And you could always say, well, anyone can make a mistake, not when the stakes are that high. That will just be, oh, the police are bad, I think it was a black person that she shot, right? Like, I didn't see the details of that story. But it's just like, I just shake my head when I hear things like that. It's like, this is a result of reforms that we could make. Like, this is an indicator of reforms that we could make to actually better policing in our society, along with requiring the main sort of thing that police are supposed to do, basically overturning the Supreme Court rulings that say police don't have an obligation to protect people. That would be huge too, but that'll probably never happen. But, we have to have police officers meet high standards of professionalism, and a lot of them don't, and that results in things like, in my opinion, a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't, and that results in things like, oops, I pulled my gun instead of my taser and shot somebody to death. Fucking ridiculous. It's just, that kind of thing is worth some profanity, I think. To think that it's about the whole oppressed narrative rather than just incompetence is dumb. You don't do something like that and say, oh, I meant to pull my taser, unless you're a bad cop. That's my little mini rant on that. It really wasn't related to anything else, but it just shows you that there is no desire to actually reform the police, right? It's just a matter of selling the leftist narrative of this group of people's oppressed, this other group of people, and I don't remember whether it was you, Pedrito, I think that mentioned that, Pedrito, about how it's really just about taking the group of people that would defend society, the people that will stand up for Western values, and marginalizing them as much as possible, right? That's what it is. It's like you marginalize white people, women, conservatives, Christians, groups of people that are labeled as the oppressor classes, so that, there's no one really going to resist you when you take everyone's rights away and you put all the wealth into corporations and government and you just control everyone. And you don't give people any rights. You just make them dependent on you as long as possible and hope that your society doesn't collapse from the economic reality of that situation. That's really the direction that I think we're heading. But that's, I've been ranting on for like 2 hours now, and it's really late on my end of the country, so yeah, I probably should have done this a couple hours earlier, but I still appreciate a lot of the good comments from Pedrito and MGTOW Values and TVOR earlier, and Pulse Kebab, and other people that Anon Bradley left a comment earlier on. Like I say, I really just wanted to get some of these ideas off of my chest to talk about how, I see this sort of dead end for normies. Either they're going to have to wake up at some level and stop believing what the news media tells them and stop watching the mainstream media, or they're going to have to just basically give in to Marxism. Like, it's inevitable. They're going to be Marxists because that's what they believe. That's what the media that tells them is going to convince them is the case. Like what I mentioned with the Bill of Rights, people seem to think that these, the different sort of amendments within the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, they're going to be revoked. They're going to be repealed. That's not the way that I think it's going to happen, right? The last thing that will happen is that the amendments will be officially repealed or the Constitution itself will be officially revoked or nullified. Instead, you're just going to get this whole concept that people are taught to believe in, that, oh, you have free speech rights, but you're not protected against the consequences of your speech. You have the right to bear arms, but these red flag laws protect us in case we think you're going to do something criminal, even if you haven't done anything wrong at that point. Or there's no strong indication that you will even do anything criminal. That's okay, but you still have the right to bear arms that can't be infringed upon, except when we think you're dangerous, and then we'll infringe on it, and that's okay. Same with due process. Oh, you have the right to due process, but if a woman wants to accuse you of something in the family law court, like domestic violence, that's all right. We'll just assume that that's true. Or, we'll get you fired from work because a woman made a claim and we need to listen and believe. Right? Men and women is where you see the real, right now, the really worst sort of due process things going on where, women are successfully eroding away those rights for men. Feminist women in particular are supporting that. But yet a lot of people, even a lot of conservatives, they'll talk about the Second Amendment all day long, but, and the First Amendment and the Fifth, but at the same time, those things aren't going to be directly threatened. It's just that we're going to have other laws that supersede those rights, which you can't tolerate if you actually want those rights to be in effect. But very few people will even speak out against a lot of things like hate speech laws and the idea that you shouldn't be protected from unreasonable consequences of your speech. People just don't see the connection with that, or they don't want to stop and say this is just as bad as repealing the amendments themselves, right? It's the same effect. People want to believe in this fantasy, I guess, that that's not what's going on. But this idea that, oh, these laws will be repealed once, things get so bad. No, you won't have those rights. Those rights will be gone long before anything gets repealed. And the final point that I made is just that, I think that there is a similarity between things like MGTOW, men not, being willing to enter into any significant, any conventional relationship with women, especially not marrying women, not having children with women, and not living with them. Men realizing that women, for the most part, and you can argue about exceptions that you have or don't have, are just trouble for men. And there's really very little positive, interaction that you can have with most women out there. And you can blame men for that and say that that's sexist and misogynistic, whatever. It doesn't change the risk assessment. If, this is clearly where we're at, in my opinion, and if there's no incentive for men to participate, they're just going to either participate long enough to get laid, or they're just going to go monk, or they're just going to have short-term relationships, whatever the case may be, based on that man's revised goals. But, we're not going to care about women's issues. That's another thing I didn't mention too much and might save for another time. But, we're taught, oh, what about women's issues? Well, we have no incentive to deal with your issues. You tell us we don't, we're not needed anyway. You can do anything we can do. So why would we care about your issues? But again, that's just, in this case, that's a part of what I'm saying with men are realizing there's no reason to invest in women in a conventional sense, in a sense that could lead to marriage or having kids. The same type of thing, I think, is true with police officers now, right? And I'm not a police apologist. There's a lot about the policing in the United States that I don't like. I don't really trust the police, to be honest. But that being said, it makes no sense for them to patrol black neighborhoods anymore, right? There's nothing positive that's going to happen if you can save a black person from getting stabbed, and because the black person that you shot in order to do that died, or because you had to go through that process, you had to basically shoot them to stop them from stabbing another black person. Now you're still the oppressor. You're still the scum of the earth, according to the media and according to the leftist narrative. So why continue to patrol those neighborhoods? Like, it doesn't make sense. And, we're going to see this with a variety of things. Good people are going to continue to just say, you know what? Nah, we're just not going to get involved. I'd like to have a positive result. Maybe you could say, you're a so-called good man, but that's rhetoric that's misused a lot in our society. But let's say you are a good man, right? By any reasonable standard, which, your own standard is going to be the most important one there. But let's say you are a good man. Well, you might have been a good father. You might have been a good husband to a woman in a society where that was functional. But you know what? It's not. So those people lose out. The wife that you could have married no longer is going to benefit from you. And that's the fault of women collectively, and weak men collectively too, for creating that environment. But it's the same thing. It's like, maybe that you're a police officer and you'd like to help the situation in black neighborhoods, but what's going to happen. No matter what you do, it'll be, whether it actually is good or bad, actually is positive or negative, it'll be seen as negative. You'll be seen as the oppressor. Your very life and well-being is going to be in danger just because you might get covered in a news story and they might just say, police officer bad because he protected this person from somebody else that was going to hurt them. That's just what you're going to get a lot of the time. So why would you even consider patrolling those areas and whatnot? Why would you put yourself in that situation? Even if you are a good, police officer, why would you do that? And the same is going to be true with a lot of other people, as this whole separation, this whole dichotomy between supposedly oppressed and supposedly bad people continues, right? If white men are not going to be respected no matter what we do because we're white men, we're just gonna not care, right? We're just gonna basically do our own thing. There's gonna be a variety of responses, don't get me wrong, but why try to prove anything to society when you're gonna be seen as the devil no matter what you do, right? And it's not just those factors. It's just it relates to everything else too. Another example that you could use that's not as extreme is, LGBTQ versus someone that has a conservative lifestyle. I hate using that term lifestyle. It's like they're basically your sexual choices. Your lifestyle is not really determined by your sexual choices necessarily, other than how they're interrelated with your personality. But, are people that say, you know what? I think that the natural way of things is for men and women to get together because that's how we became 7 billion people on this planet. What happens when you're challenged? When you can't say things like that in public anymore, you'll be ostracized. So you're just going to basically, again, you're going to stop trying to engage with people that it's like, well, if you're pro LGBTQ and I have this view on how family should be structured, even though, again, you could be aware that the whole family scene is dead now because of no-fault divorce and feminism, you're not going to really sit there and try to engage on that. You're just going to say, you know what? I'm just going to pretend to go along with this, or I'm just going to disengage from people that I know are LGBTQ people, even if they're actually good people, even if those particular people would not be offended by you. The overall environment, the overall culture, the overall narrative is such that you're just bad for thinking that men and women is the natural, getting together and having babies is the natural way of things, even though it's demonstrably true. It's obviously true. Not that that means, of course, that you can't choose something else. That's not what I'm saying. But just automatically saying those things, you're going to be ostracized now. So you're not, if you're a more conservative person in terms of your own personal sexual choices, it's like you're going to look at that and say, yeah, if you're LGBTQ, I'm not going to try to be friends with you, because you're probably going to get butthurt. No pun intended. You're probably going to be an SJW. That would be a better way of putting that. And, you're going to be labeled as, or you're going to try to label me as, an oppressor, because that's what you've been taught. That sadly is kind of the state of things today. The silver lining with this, and this is the point that I'm going to finally wrap this stream on, for anybody that reads this later on or listens to this video later on, there is a silver lining to all this, I think. And that is, you can still find some good people in this world, in this society. You can't always know who those people are right away, and there's a lot of sort of threats within the culture. Like, you can't go out and just say, hey, this is who I am. You can't make it plain that, you don't go along with the SJW leftist normie now, or becoming normie way of thinking. We're developing toward that. But you can still find good people. You can find good white people. You can find good black people that don't go along with the BLM stuff. You could find women that really are actually anti-feminist. And I'm not saying you can get married to them. No, I'm not saying, you abandon what you know about how that works out for men today. I'm not saying that there are no waltz, but I do believe that there are some decent, good women out there that realize what's going on, realize they can't necessarily do anything about it, but can still be your friend. Now, if you don't want to be friends with women, again, I can understand that choice too, but there are good people in every demographic. There are good people who are LGBTQ, but couldn't give a shit less whether you want to go along with that or not, and they'll still be your friend, right? There are people who fall into that category for sure. But the problem is, you can't know, and a lot of people within these sort of movements or in these demographics have been swept up in the social justice, cultural Marxist BS that we see today. And so good people, white people, black people, men, women, people who are straight as an arrow, and people who aren't, regardless of religion too. Christians and Muslims and Jews, it's not impossible to work together. But I think that's where the focus has to be now. The focus has to be on your group of people that you trust. The people and the things in your lives that deserve to matter based on their quality of character, not based on what group they fall into necessarily. Because you have a lot of dumb white liberals too who totally go along with the SJW stuff, and if you're a white man, it doesn't matter whether that person's also a white man. Like, you want to stay as far away from white liberals as you can, regardless of whether you share the same ethnic heritage. It means nothing, right? That's the point that I'm trying to make here, is you've just got to try to find, I think, the good people who are left and help those people. And, care about those people, right? And they should have your back and care about you too. And it's very difficult to find these people, especially in real life sometimes, like especially in your community. It's easier to find these kinds of people online sometimes, I think. But, you can also, of course, just decide to isolate yourself and not have friends. And I'm not saying that in a negative sense. It's just I can understand just giving up on it. But I do think good people can work together still. It's just a matter of knowing what standards need to be there, knowing what it is that you shouldn't put up with. The whole SJW mentality is just an immediate strikeout as far as I'm concerned now. I've actually cut out old friends that I've had. I've tried to, grandfather a few of them in, which I really shouldn't do. But friends that I've had from high school and college who I know have been swept up into the Marxist mindset. They are Marxists. And then I have, like I've mentioned, people in my family who really aren't Marxists, but because they, like I say, they're normies and they believe whatever the mainstream media tells them, they are effectively becoming closer and closer to adopting Marxism. So, all of these factors come into play. All these factors may be worth consideration, but I do think good people can still work together. It's just a matter of who those people are and realizing that they're going to be more and more harder to find, I think. That's just the silver lining that I kind of wanted to end this video on, is try to find the good people who are left, to be friends with. I'm not saying that, men and women can't have some form of relationships, but that's increasingly difficult. In some places, it's literally impossible. Like, if you're going to be considered, married according to, what's the term for it? Married according to, the common law marriage. If you're going to be considered married in that way because you went to a vacation home for a few weeks every year, at that point, relationships are probably impossible to have in any positive sense for the guy in that situation. But, I'm not saying you can't have positive connections or relationships in a smaller sense with people overall. I still think that's a good thing. I still think that really to have a good life, that's probably, for most people, still necessary. But you have to determine what that means. You have to be able to filter out everybody else. And unfortunately, as things in our society continue to deteriorate, that everybody else group that, are corrupted by the culture, corrupted by the media, all the bullshit that, well, you need to get a vaccine or you're not a good person, or you're a white cop, so you're bad no matter what the facts actually are, where you tried to save this other person's life or did save another person's life who happened to be black, but you shot a black person to make that happen, so you're the devil anyway. You've got to get away from everybody that has that kind of mindset. Don't form connections and relationships with those people beyond what you absolutely have to do in life. But again, I think the silver lining is you still can find good people. Even, on YouTube and whatnot, I've found some people that, I've become friends with that are good people. But, in real life, it's hard to find people that think for themselves. It's hard to find people that have broken free from this. And like I say, sometimes I feel like I'm the one that's not right, because I'm trying to think for myself, and a lot of other people just don't, for whatever reason. Whether they don't know how or it's too hard, I don't know. Like I say, I don't like being in the position of thinking that I'm somehow smarter than everybody else. I don't think that, but it's just sad to me that the vast majority of people don't question so much of the stuff we see, let alone agree. I'm not saying everybody would have to agree with me, but it's just, there's just this lack of a basic level of thinking for yourself. And again, the best thing we can do, I think, is to continue to try to have healthy relationships and connections with the people that are good people that are left, and to walk away from the people that are swept up in all this. All the SJW, leftist, pro-government, pro-control, pro-taking individual people's rights away to make their own decisions. And you have to, I think it's important to stay away from those people. And like I mentioned, I think that we're really at a crossroads where the normies are going to have to make a decision. They can't be normie and not be a leftist. That's going to become impossible soon, I think. Very soon. Probably within the next few months. It's already bad, in terms of the narrative that you're supposed to believe that involves enforcing that narrative on other people. I think you're going to have to either start thinking for yourself eventually, People are going to have to develop that, or they're going to fall into the whole, well, we support these ideas that are essentially Marxist in origin and in nature. So, like I said, guys, try to find good people if you can. If not, then do your thing as an individual. That's what you have to do anyway. But, it's just a question of whether other people can come along for the ride or not. But those are some of the thoughts I've had lately. This has been a really long stream. I appreciate all the people that have commented and contributed, and I will see you on the next videos that I make. Thanks for tuning in.